too strong. And STA the board. Clark 1 for 4 in the early go. Fires!
About 45 minutes after the final buzzer sounded in Portland, the clip started moving. Less than 30 seconds of footage. Stephanie White, jaw set, eyes locked, giving forceful instruction on the Fever bench during a second-quarter timeout. Caitlin Clark, arms shooting up in the air, frustration breaking through, pushing back, and then White turning and calling for rookie Raven Johnson to check in. Clark standing up, watching the rest of the huddle from outside it. The clip hit social media, and within the hour, it was everywhere. On every sports account, on every sports talk show, trending on X, the subject of every WNBA discussion for the next 72 hours. Basketball legend Cheryl Miller reacted within hours. Media dissected every frame. Fans built their verdicts from 30 seconds of footage. And here is the thing that makes this whole story worth a full breakdown. The footage is real, the tension was real, and what happened in the 3 months between that Portland bench and this week's locker room tells you more about this coaching relationship than any clip ever could. By the end of this video, you are going to understand the full arc of what has happened between Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark in 2026. From the Portland benching that broke the internet, through every moment in between, all the way to the footage that dropped just this week that the WNBA is still talking about. And stay with me, because at the 10-minute mark, I am going to show you the 2 most revealing pieces of footage in this entire story that almost nobody is connecting to each other, and when you see them side by side, the whole Clark-White dynamic looks completely different. Let's start at the very beginning of 2026, because the Portland moment did not happen in a vacuum, and you cannot understand what the footage showed without knowing everything that built up to it. Stephanie White came into her second season as Indiana's head coach, with a Fever team that had taken major steps in 2025. A 24-20 record, a run to the semifinals, a franchise finally trending in the right direction, despite Clark playing only 13 games due to injury. Entering 2026, expectations were the highest they had ever been. Clark was healthy, Kelsey Mitchell was back, Aaliyah Boston was back. The front office had re-signed Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull. This was supposed to be the year Indiana competed for a championship, not just a playoff spot. The early results were mixed. The Fever won their first 3 games and looked dangerous. Then came a West Coast road trip in late May that exposed real vulnerabilities. Indiana lost to the Golden State Valkyries on Thursday, May 28th, with Clark struggling defensively and the team failing to find rhythm. Clark declined to speak to reporters after that loss, an unusual move that itself became a brief storyline. Then came Saturday, May 30th in Portland. The Indiana Fever versus the Portland Fire, an expansion team, a 12-point underdog, a team that had existed for less than 1 full season. Indiana was favored by double digits. What happened instead was one of the Fever's worst performances of the young season, and the most discussed sideline moment in the WNBA since the league tipped off. Here are the exact details of what the footage shows and why every frame of it matters. The clip, posted by the account Mostly WNBA Tweets on X, is under 30 seconds long. It opens with White in the middle of a timeout huddle, her voice forceful, her body language direct, clearly making a specific point about something that had gone wrong on the floor. Clark, seated on the bench, puts both arms up in the air. It is the physical equivalent of disagreeing in public. White does not back down. She continues making her point, and then, without hesitation, turns and gestures to rookie Raven Johnson to check in. Johnson walks to the scorer's table. Clark stands up from the bench and watches the remainder of the huddle from outside the circle, next to developmental players Justine Pissot and Bree Hall. She is physically removed from the team conversation she was just benched out of. The game context matters. Indiana was down by double digits. Clark had gone 1 for 7 from the field. She was in foul trouble with 5 fouls. Portland's Carla Leahy had carved her up for 18 points and 12 assists on the other end. It was Clark's worst statistical outing of the entire season. 6 points, 6 assists, just 21 minutes. And the bench exchange happened in that context. Cheryl Miller, reached for comment by Yahoo Sports the following day, gave the most measured reaction of anyone in the public conversation. She said it was frustration, that it was boiling over, and that unfortunately it was being seen. That framing, frustration made visible by cameras, is the most honest description of what the footage actually shows. But by then, the internet had already built its verdict, and it was not nearly that measured. Now let's talk about what happened next, because this is the part of the story that the viral clip discourse completely skipped. 2 days later, Monday, June 2nd, Clark walked into practice and faced the media. And what she said dismantled almost every narrative that had been built around the footage over the previous 48 hours. She said, first of all, two people being competitive. Two people that really want to win. She said these things happen all the time, and she knows there is a camera on her, and that is how it is going to be. And then she said something that landed harder than anything else in the whole media cycle. She said, there are a lot of people out there in the media or on TV who think they know a lot of things, and they are just blatantly wrong about a lot of things. She said, I ride for Steph. 4 words. After 2 days of the entire sports internet analyzing 30 seconds of footage and building elaborate theories about a broken coaching relationship, 4 words from Clark herself. I ride for Steph. Stephanie White's response at the same press conference was equally clear. She explained the substitution. She was managing minutes, managing workloads across a 44-game season, and the exchange on the bench was two competitive people who both desperately wanted to win. Neither of them gave the narrative an inch, and then they went out and started winning games. But here is the thing that the quick reaction commentary never addressed. Even after Clark said those 4 words, even after White explained the rotation logic, the external pressure on this relationship did not stop. It intensified, and the footage kept coming. Here is the big picture that connects every piece of footage in this story and gives you the full arc from Portland in May all the way to this week. The WNBA has produced more viral footage of the Clark-White dynamic in 2026 than in the previous 2 seasons combined. Some of that footage showed tension. Some of it showed something completely different. After the Portland benching clip, the next major piece of footage that went viral was not a sideline confrontation at all. It was a press conference clip where Clark's facial expression as White coughed nearby became a trending topic. Yahoo Sports captioned the clip, "Find yourself a star player that looks at your coach like Caitlin Clark looks at Steph White." The joke was warm and affectionate, not critical. The comments showed how quickly Clark content can move from harmless moment to full WNBA discourse. But in that case, the discourse was actually positive. Then came the footage from July 3rd. White picked up a technical foul during a blowout win over the Las Vegas Aces, fired up at a referee over physical play on Kelsey Mitchell. Clark, sitting on the bench injured and in street clothes, jumped out of her seat, walked over to White, clapped and high-fived her. Cameras caught Clark mouthing the words, and this is confirmed by multiple reporters in the building. Yeah, White told media afterward that Clark said she had her back, and that Clark was going to cover the fine, joking that she had just got a bonus. Remember that. Portland benching in May. Tension. July 3rd technical foul. Clark jumping off the bench to celebrate White's fire. Those 2 pieces of footage in the same season. And they are the 2 that you need to hold in your head before we get to what I am about to show you. Here comes the number I teased at the start. The Indiana Fever are 23-12 since the Portland game. Since the moment that 30-second clip broke the internet and launched 1,000 narratives about a fractured coaching relationship, 23-12, and the footage released just last week shows you exactly what that record was built on. Here is what everyone is missing in this story, and it changes everything about how you read the Clark-White dynamic. The first piece of footage nobody is connecting properly is what the Fever shared publicly after their 95-91 overtime win over the Atlanta Dream on August 17th. Indiana released the actual locker room footage from White's post-game talk. She walked into that locker room after a brutal overtime grind, looked at her players, and the first thing she said was, and this is a direct quote captured on camera, "CC, what the fef?" That defense was outstanding. Outstanding. The entire locker room erupted. Clark was all smiles. White said she could not be more proud. That is the same Stephanie White who Portland footage showed forcefully benching Clark after a bad defensive performance in May. She benched her for bad defense in May. She called her out in the locker room for outstanding defense in August. Those are not the actions of a coach who has given up on her player or a player who has stopped trusting her coach. That is a coaching relationship, doing exactly what a coaching relationship is supposed to do, holding a player accountable when performance drops and publicly celebrating when the player responds. The second piece of footage nobody is connecting: on August 11th, when Fever fans at Gainbridge Fieldhouse booed Stephanie White during pregame introductions, Clark stepped to the microphone after Indiana's 106-92 win over the New York Liberty, a game in which Clark finished with 22 points and 10 assists for her 10th double-double of the season, and said, "It's tough. That's my head coach." I hated that our fans booed her before the game. That made me a little sick, to be honest. She called out her own fan base for booing her own coach after a win. That is not the statement of a player who is secretly hoping her coach gets fired. That is the statement of a player who is furious that the noise from outside the building has gotten loud enough to reach inside it. Are you starting to see why the 30-second Portland clip was only part of the story? Drop it in the comments. Do you think the full picture of the Clark-White footage changes how you see their relationship compared to what you thought when you first saw the Portland bench exchange? My verdict on the Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark coaching relationship in 2026 is the most important thing I am going to say in this video, and I want you to hear it clearly. The footage from Portland showed a real moment of tension between two competitive people in the worst game either of them had experienced all season. It was real. It was not staged. But the footage from the 48 hours after Portland, Clark's 4 words, White's calm explanation, and the footage from every week since then, the technical foul celebration, the locker room eruption, the fans booing defense, tells a story that is the complete opposite of the broken relationship narrative. Here is reason 1. Coaches who have lost their players do not get jumped off the bench with a high five when they pick up a technical. Players who have lost faith in their coaches do not call out their own fans for booing that coach after a win. Reason 2. The Fever's record since Portland is 23-12. That is the record of a team that used the controversy as fuel rather than collapsing under it. Exactly the pattern this franchise has shown every single time outside noise has tried to pull it apart in 2026. Reason 3. White's locker room footage after the Dream overtime win is the most revealing piece of content produced about this relationship all season. She saw Clark play outstanding defense in a critical game, and she went into that locker room and celebrated it in the most direct, unfiltered way possible. That is not a coach who resents her star. That is a coach who is genuinely proud of her star. The strongest counter-argument is that the cameras only show what the cameras show, and that tensions which exist behind closed doors do not always make it onto broadcast footage. That is true. But the team's results and the public statements from both Clark and White have been completely consistent. The noise is outside, the winning is inside, and the footage, when you watch all of it instead of just 30 seconds of it, tells a story that is far more interesting and far more human than any of the viral clips on their own. 3 predictions for how this plays out. Prediction 1. Footage of a positive Clark-White moment. A sideline celebration, a locker room speech, a pregame huddle, goes viral at some point in the final stretch of the regular season or the playoffs, and shifts the public narrative from tension to trust permanently. Time frame: next 4 to 6 weeks. Confidence: high. The pattern this season is clear. The negative footage leads, but the positive footage follows. And the playoff stage will be the highest profile backdrop yet. Prediction 2. Stephanie White wins WNBA Coach of the Year for the 2026 season, with voters pointing specifically to how she managed the Clark dynamic, the political firestorm, the officiating controversy, and still produced a 25-plus win team. Time frame: end of season awards. Confidence: medium. Her body of work is genuinely impressive, and the coaching narrative around her has been underrated relative to the player narrative around Clark all season. Prediction 3. The bold one. In the 2026 WNBA playoffs, a moment of sideline communication between Clark and White that gets captured on camera becomes the defining image of Indiana's postseason run. Not a controversy, but a confirmation. A visible moment of trust between two people who spent an entire regular season having their relationship questioned publicly. Time frame: WNBA playoffs September 2026. Confidence: low to medium, bold by nature, but built on a season's worth of evidence that these two people are closer than the Portland clip ever suggested. Here is what to watch in the final weeks of the regular season. First, watch Stephanie White's in-game decisions in the Fever's next 3 home games specifically. If her rotation management in close games shows adjustments from the early season patterns that frustrated Clark, longer first-quarter runs, fewer simultaneous benching of multiple starters, that is evidence the coaching relationship has evolved in real time. Second, watch whether the Fever release any more locker room footage. The Dream post-game clip was not an accident. The team chose to share it publicly, which means the franchise is aware of the narrative and actively using positive footage to push back against it. If more comes, that is a deliberate communication strategy. Third, watch Clark's body language on the bench, specifically during tight fourth-quarter moments. Not for evidence of tension, but for evidence of what the full arc of this season has produced, which is a player who has been tested, challenged, benched, celebrated, and now heading into the playoffs with something to prove. The next video is going deep on the Indiana Fever's complete playoff picture. Every seeding scenario, every potential first-round opponent, and why the team that ends up on the other side of their bracket could determine whether 2026 is the year this franchise finally wins a series for the first time since 2012. The single most important thing to take away from everything in this video is this: 30 seconds of footage from Portland on May 30th launched 1,000 narratives. But the full season of footage, the technical foul celebration, the locker room roar, the fans booing defense, and a 23-12 record tells a different story entirely. If you want WNBA analysis that watches all the footage instead of just the viral clip, subscribe right now. I break down every major storyline every single week. Final question for the comments. After watching everything this season has produced between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White, do you believe this is a healthy coaching relationship that is driving Indiana toward a championship? Or is there still something under the surface that could break in September when it matters most? One answer. Let's hear it. Here is the one thing I want to add before we close that puts the entire Portland footage moment in the proper historical context. Every great coaching relationship in sports history has a moment of visible friction that gets captured in public and immediately becomes the defining narrative about whether the partnership works. Phil Jackson and Kobe Bryant had those moments. Larry Bird and his coaches had those moments. Pat Summitt and her players at Tennessee had those moments. The friction is not evidence that the relationship is broken. In every one of those cases, the friction was part of the process of building something that could survive the highest pressure moments. Playoff games where everything is on the line and the margin for error is zero. Stephanie White benched Caitlin Clark during a brutal loss to an expansion team in May. 2.5 months later, she walked into a locker room after an overtime win and screamed about how outstanding Clark's defense was. That is not a broken relationship. That is a relationship being forged. The Portland footage was Chapter 1. The overtime win footage was Chapter 10. The playoffs in September will be the chapters that determine what this story is actually about. And when you have all the footage, not just 30 seconds of it, but everything, you realize you are watching something being built, not something falling apart. Let me add one more layer that nobody in the viral clip era of sports media takes the time to properly examine. When Clark said, "I ride for Steph" at that Monday press conference, she was not just saying it for the cameras. She was saying it 2 days after being publicly benched in front of a national television audience. After one of the worst games of her career, after 48 hours of social media speculation about whether her relationship with her coach was broken beyond repair. If she had any genuine desire to distance herself from White in that moment, that press conference was the perfect opportunity to do it. She could have said the right things diplomatically and left it at that. Instead, she went further. She called out the outside commentary directly, blatantly wrong about a lot of things, and then doubled down with the 4 words. That level of public loyalty in that specific moment tells you the relationship is built on something real enough that a bad game and a viral bench exchange could not shake it. And then consider what White said in that same press conference. She did not throw Clark under the bus for the defensive struggles that led to the benching. She explained the rotation logic. She defended the decision without attacking the player. Two people in a hard moment choosing to protect each other rather than protect themselves. That is what a real coaching relationship looks like when it is tested in public. The Portland footage showed you the test. Everything that came after showed you the result. 23-12 since Portland. That is the only footage that ultimately matters. Watch the playoffs and see how the story ends. The internet saw 30 seconds of footage and wrote a season-long verdict. The actual season has been writing a completely different one. Game by game, win by win, locker room speech by locker room speech. Both pieces of footage are real. Only one of them tells the full story. Now you have seen both. The Portland clip broke the internet. The overtime locker room footage answered it. The playoffs in September will close the chapter. Do not miss what comes next, because this story is nowhere near finished, and the most important footage of all has not been filmed yet. Subscribe so you do not miss that breakdown when it drops. It is going to be the most important Fever video of the entire year. I will see you there.